So good evening. Just want to double check. Dave, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Laura. This is Gary.
Okay, thank you. I just want to welcome everybody this evening to our interim community stakeholder meeting for the Lantana Airport Safety Assessment. We have a lot of information to go through today. That it'll be kicked off by Dave Ramacordy with Recondo and Associates. They've been engaged by Palm Beach County to perform the safety assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to him, but I would like to thank you all for attending tonight. Dave, are you ready? I think Dave Ramacordy is having some technical difficulties right now.
I have no audio.
We can hear you, Dave.
Dave, if you're speaking, we can hear you now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I can't hear anyone on your end, so I apologize. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Dave Ramacordy with Recondo and Associates. Just trying to turn my camera on here. Okay, so yes, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I apologize, I have some audio issues, but I think we can work through this tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Okay, so just before we get started, I did just want to give everybody some assistance on using the GoToWebinar application. We will be opening up for at the end of the presentation for comments and questions. However, if you would like to enter any questions or comments as we're going through the presentation, you will be able to do that. If you have a desktop application, there is an icon at the top of the screen that has a question mark on it, and if you click on that, it will open up a chat and you'll be able to enter comments or questions. If you happen to be on a mobile application, you have the same capability. However, that icon is actually located at the bottom of the screen of your Okay. Also, if you have any technical issues, you could also type a message into the question box on the portal as well. If for some reason you are disconnected, you will be able to submit an email or contact us by phone. You could either email to chuck@valorangroup.com. That's CHUCK @valorangroup.com. VALERIN-group.com. Or you could also call at 1-833-851-8340, and we'll do our best to assist you and get you back connected to the meeting. I just want to give a quick overview of the agenda for this evening's discussion. I know we started with Laura's introduction. We will introduce the rest of the team that are online with us from the Palm Beach County Department of Airports. We'll also give you a quick overview of our discussion tonight, and then we'll really dive into present our preliminary findings for some of the technical analyses that have been completed to date for the safety assessment. This will include an analysis of the jet aircraft fleet at the airport that has materialized since the lifting of the jet ban back in November. We'll also walk you through our evaluation of the airfield design standards, particularly as it pertains to the introduction of the jet activity at the airport, and identify and demonstrate how we comply or may not comply with those standards. We'll also talk about the airfield pavement and the strength the strength of the pavement and the design strength in order to accommodate the new fleet of jet aircraft operations. And then we'll wrap up with a discussion of our next steps and then open it up for comments and questions at that point. So Ms. Beebe, who is the Director of Airports, led our introductions here. Myself, this is Dave Ramacordi again. I am the project manager with Recondo and Associates. I'll be leading our discussions tonight. Joining us also, we have Gary Sipek from the Palm Beach County Department of Airports. He's the Senior Deputy Director of Airports. And we also have Michael Giabroni, who is the Director of Airports Planning. Also like to provide recognition to our team. This study is not just being conducted by Recondo and Associates. We are the prime consultant and taking the lead on the analysis, but we are supported by a couple of sub-consultants. They include American Infrastructure Development. They're a civil engineering firm that supports us from that standpoint. They have led the airfield pavement strength analysis. They'll also be conducting obstruction evaluations and preparing cost estimates for any type of mitigation that we may deem necessary. We also have Quadrex Aviation. They are conducting a benefit cost analysis to determine the feasibility of establishing an air traffic control tower at the airport under the federal contract tower program. And then we're also assisted with the Valoran Group, who's actually assisting us with the logistics for all of these stakeholder meetings, including the one for tonight as well. So I'd like to provide thank you to our team members for assisting us. So during the first meeting that we had back in July, there was a request made to provide an interim update to the public and to the stakeholders to present our preliminary findings. So that's the intent of this meeting here. We're approximately at the midpoint of the overall assessment. So we just want to provide a status update on the overall assessment and provide you a summary of the airfield assessment that we have conducted to this date. Overall, the safety assessment has three primary objectives. The first one is to examine the potential implications associated with the introduction of jet operations at the airport. We're also examining the interaction of the jet operations in terms of the airspace and interaction with nearby airports, as well as evaluating the airspace in and around the airport. We will also provide recommendations regarding any potential mitigation measures to enhance operational safety as a result of the introduction of the jet operations. So I just want to reiterate that this study really just is intended to focus on the introduction of jet operations and what that means from a safety consideration at the airport. Now, back in July, we did conduct our first public and stakeholder briefing. It was conducted on July 18th. The meeting was held at the Palm Beach State College at the Lake Worth campus. And the primary purpose of that meeting was just to brief the stakeholders in the community on the overall project, present the scope, and then solicit input that could inform the safety assessment. There were 6 primary topics that were covered during that meeting. That included a general overview of the airport. We also discussed the timeline of the jet restrictions at Lantana and the events that lead to the rescinding of the jet restrictions last November. We also provided some information on the operational levels associated with jet operations since the denial of the county's appeal after the determination was made by the FAA to rescind the jet restriction. We also discussed the roles and responsibilities for aviation safety as it pertains to the Federal Aviation Administration, the Palm Beach County Department of Airports, pilots, the users, the operators, the tenants, as well as the National Transportation Safety Board. And then we concluded with an overview of the contents of the study and the scope of the study, and then opened it up for stakeholder comments at that point. If you were not able to attend the first meeting, those documents are available online. That includes the presentation from the first meeting, as well as a copy of the original scope of services that was shared during that meeting. This is the web link there. I believe that there should also, if you go into the chat feature, there should be a link to to this web page as well, and you can download those two documents in a PDF format as well if you'd like to look at those. Now, in addition to this safety assessment, there are two other ongoing studies that the Palm Beach County Department of Airports is undertaken. The first one, you may well be aware, is there's a Part 150 noise study that has been ongoing since actually it initiated before we started the jet assessment. This noise study is actually being conducted by another consultant. It is estimated to be completed in the spring of 2024. It is a voluntary study, and it's really intended to address airport noise and incompatible land uses in and around the airport. And there are two primary elements associated with the noise study. The first one is the generation of a noise exposure map, which really shows the existing and future aircraft sound exposure levels and around the airport. And then based on those noise exposure maps, the study evaluates a variety of measures to address aircraft noise through a noise compatibility program. That study has a separate public outreach process that is being led by the Department of Airports, as well as the consultant that's conducting that study on behalf of the Department of Airports. We, Recondo and Associates, are also conducting an update to the airport master plan. We started that concurrently with the onset of the safety assessment that we're discussing tonight. This study will run parallel and will be somewhat integrated within some of the findings from this study. And we anticipate that the master plan will be completed by fall of 2024. Now, the master plan is really a comprehensive study of all of the airport facilities and to establish a long-term development plan to meet current and future aviation demand at the airport. It does look at a 20-year planning horizon, and it really sets the framework to guide future development at the airport so that facilities are adequate to meet projected demand at the airport. The primary objectives is to justify the proposed development through an evaluation of concepts and alternatives. It'll result with a graphic representation of the future airport development in the form of what's referred to as an airport layout plan drawing set, which is submitted to the FAA for formal approval and adoption. And it really ensures that the future development plan is implementable, it's realistic, and financially feasible. Now, the safety assessment is comprised of four primary tasks. This includes the meetings and consultations that we're engaged in. We are conducting two technical analyses. One will focus on the airfield and everything pretty much within the confines of the airport. And then we're also conducting an airspace assessment, which looks at the regional airspace in and around the airport. And then the final completion of this effort will result in a series of deliverables, which will include a summary PowerPoint presentation, as well as a technical report. The focus of tonight's meeting is to discuss what the preliminary findings from the airfield assessment. We have completed 4 of the 7 tasks associated with that. The other 3 are still ongoing. The airspace assessment is still ongoing as well. Those other tasks will be summarized, and we will present those in a final stakeholder briefing, which we anticipate we'll be doing after the first of the year. So the airfield assessment is focused on 7 primary tasks. The 4 on the left are the ones we'll be discussing tonight, starting with the analysis of the jet aircraft fleet mix at the airport. We'll identify jet aircraft that either have or could operate at the airport, and we have conducted an aircraft performance evaluation for those aircraft. The aircraft performance evaluation really focuses on the runway length requirements of the aircraft and comparing them to the actual available runway lengths that exist at the airport today. We also have completed a review of the airfield design standards. The intent of that review is to verify that the airfield does comply with the runway and taxiway design standards as prescribed by the Federal Aviation Administration in light of the introduction of the jet aircraft operations there at the airport. We also evaluated all of the airfield pavements to assess whether they were designed to accommodate the projected, or the current and projected jet fleet mix, particularly in terms of weight and the design standards for those. We'll also talk a little bit about the runway protection zones, which are also a part of the airfield design standards review, but they are a little bit different where they focus on compatible land uses off the ends of the runways. We have evaluated those and identified identified where those our runway protection zones comply with existing airfield design standards. And it's really from a land use compatibility standpoint that this focuses on in terms of having land uses within the runway protection zones that comply with those standards. I do want to highlight the fact that a land use compatibility is different than noise compatibility, and the noise compatibility is somewhat different and is being evaluated as part of the ongoing Part 150 noise study. So the land use compatibility within the runway protection zone is somewhat different. The other 3 tasks include the intersecting runway interactions. We will evaluate the runway use for the jet aircraft operations and determine or assess the interaction with non-jet aircraft traffic patterns at the airport. Sometimes when you have an aircraft such as a jet that requires a certain amount of runway length, that may cause an aircraft to operate that's on a runway that maybe the predominant flow of aircraft aren't operating on at that time. So we wanted to do an evaluation of that to ensure that the jet aircraft operations are operating consistent with the predominant flow of other non-jet aircraft operations. We'll also conduct a hazard analysis, obstruction hazard analysis. As part of the ongoing master plan, we are preparing obstruction surveys, which will essentially identify any obstacles off the ends of the runway in and around the airport, and we will evaluate those to determine if those could be a hazard to operations at the airport. And then finally, we will, once we identify and evaluate any types of mitigation alternatives that may be necessary, we will prepare cost estimates for those. That could be capital expenditures to improve infrastructure on the airfield. It could also include potential acquisition of incompatible properties within the runway protection zones, if so necessary. So back in 2021 is when the FAA made their formal determination to rescind the jet ban at the airport. The county did request a appeal for that jet ban, but because the determination was made by the FAA, jet operations actually started to materialize here at the airport back in that time period, even going back as far as 2021, but really starting back in 2022. The appeal was denied in November of 2022, and at that point, that's when jet operations really started to materialize here, and even just leading up to that, a few months before, as you can see. So over that over that period since January of 2022, we have seen 166 jet operations at the airport. 70 of those had occurred in 2022. 96 have occurred to date in 2023, and these numbers are reflective of up through the end of September. We have updated these numbers. Please keep in mind that an operation is equivalent to one takeoff or one landing, and that's how we treated it in this data. Excuse me. The jet operations were obtained from the airport's noise monitoring system, which does collect operational data for aircraft arrivals and departures from the airport, and then links that information to flight plans so that we can identify not only the aircraft types but also the runway uses as well. So with that data, we looked at the fleet mix composition since the denial of the appeal back in November. And you'll see that the predominant operation at the airport here is conducted by single engine piston aircraft, which is reflected with the green area there. We also have a fair amount of helicopter operations, which reflect about a little over 12% of the total operations. And then the rest are conducted by multi-engine piston, turboprop, and jet aircraft. As of September 30th, there have been 112 jet operations at the airport since the denial of the appeal back in November, which represents roughly 0.1% of the overall operations at the airport. There are a total of 8 jet aircraft types that we identified that have operated at the airport since the beginning of 2022. When we look at these aircraft types, and particularly as it pertains to airfield design standards, there's 3 primary elements or characteristics of the aircraft that really influence the design standards for the airfield. Those include the takeoff weight of the aircraft, the wingspan, and the approach speeds of the aircraft. So you can see that these jets that have operated, they range in weight from roughly 6,000 pounds up to almost just over 15,000 pounds with the heaviest. As aircraft get heavier, the wingspans and the approach speeds get faster. The wingspans get larger. And as a result, that influences the types of design standards that are applied to the airfield. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the design standards analysis. Based on the available runway lengths and the configuration of the airfield, there are a few other jet aircraft that could operate at Lantana. We're not saying that these aircraft will, but they are aircraft that could potentially operate there. So we did factor them into our analysis as well, from both a performance perspective as well as a airfield design standards perspective. Now, it's important to understand that the responsibility and the authority of the pilot in command really drives the aircraft performance evaluations for the airport. If you Federal Aviation Regulation Part 91, which governs all aircraft operations in terms of general operating and flight rules, defines the responsibility and authority of the pilot in command, that states that the pilot in command of an aircraft is directly responsible for and is the final authority as to the operation of that aircraft. The FAA themselves, the county, the Department of Airports, nobody else can dictate the operation of that aircraft. Only the pilot in command has that authority. And it further goes on to state that for each flight before an aircraft takes off, the pilot in command must conduct certain pre-flight actions, which includes evaluating the runway lengths of all the airports that the aircraft will be operated at. That includes the airport of departure, the airport that the aircraft is destined for, and if there's any alternate airports that are part of the flight plan as well. The pilot in command is required to evaluate the aircraft's takeoff and landing distance information and familiarize themselves with the characteristics of the airfield and the runways in terms of runway length, airport elevation, runway slope, and those types of things. So it's really ultimately the pilot in command who decides whether an operation at an airport can be conducted in a safe manner. Now, when we discuss runway length requirements or aircraft performance, we're really focused on the landing distance and the takeoff distance. Another subset or variable to aircraft performance is the aircraft range capability, which can be influenced by the takeoff length or the departure length of the runway that's available, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There are numerous factors that affect the required runway length for an aircraft. There's not just one set runway length for an aircraft. It really depends on that particular operation. All of these variables can influence the performance of the aircraft and the runway length requirements, and it can actually vary from flight to flight depending on all of these variables, whether it's the performance of the aircraft, the weight of the aircraft, the prevailing weather conditions, the airport elevation, the gradients of the runways. All of these variables can influence the required length of runway that the pilot has to count. Pilot in command is required to determine before he departs. So looking at the landing runway length analysis for those particular aircraft, this includes the 8 aircraft that we identified that have operated at the airport since 2022, as well as the couple of additional aircraft. When we look at landing distance requirements, the landing distance requirement can vary, as I mentioned. The blue lines on the chart represent the landing distance requirement at the maximum landing weight for those aircraft. The gray lines represent the runway length requirements for a lighter aircraft or a more efficient depart or landing distance. We refer to that as passenger weight, which means that it assumes 4 passengers on the aircraft, and it does assume a limited amount of payload on the aircraft. As the aircraft's payload increases, the weight increases, and the required length for runway for landing and takeoff increases as the weight increases. But as you can see here, all of the aircraft can land within the landing distances available that are available at the airport. Runway 422, which has a runway length of 3,256 feet, and runway 1028, which is the longest runway at the airport, has a runway length of almost 3,500 feet. This performance analysis or landing distance analysis does consider a hot day, which is 86 degrees Fahrenheit, which is usually more limiting. It also factors in a dry runway pavement condition. However, when the runway pavement is wet, the performance is diminished as a result. And the typical rule of thumb is to increase your landing distance requirements by 15%. So when we look at a landing on a wet runway, you will see that some of the landing distances exceed they exceed the available length for runway 422 and nearly exceed or do exceed the length for runway 1028. That does not mean that the aircraft cannot land on this airport with a run one way. What it does mean is that there's a payload and a weight restriction on that aircraft. So as long as the aircraft weight is reduced accordingly, that aircraft could still land on either of those runways. But obviously, for those couple of aircraft, the top three or four or five aircraft that are listed there, they could have some weight limitation and payload limitations for when they could land at the airport. Now, typically, when you look at your takeoff distance runway length requirements, they're more excessive and more demanding. When a pilot in command calculates his takeoff runway length, there's three variables that he has to account for. The first is the actual takeoff run, which is the distance it takes for the aircraft to accelerate down the runway and lift off the runway. The second variable or the calculation that has to be performed is to calculate the distance that's required for the aircraft to not only lift off the runway, but clear an object of 35 feet. And then the third calculation is what we refer to as accelerate stop distance. And what that is an aircraft, it starts its takeoff roll, and then just about the time the aircraft is about to lift off, they abort the takeoff, and then they decelerate on the runway. That accelerate stop distance is usually the driving factor. And as you can see here, that the runway length requirement associated with the takeoff, particularly driven by that accelerate stop distance, is more demanding in terms of the runway length that's required. Here you can see several of the aircraft when they're take off at max takeoff weight, that the runway length requirement does exceed the existing runway lengths for runway 422 and runway 1028 here at the airport. But that means that there is a payload restriction that would be imposed on those aircraft. Doesn't mean that the aircraft can't depart. It just means that their takeoff weights are limited. And just to show by comparison, the gray bars represent kind of a short range with a light passenger payload of what the runway length requirement would be for the aircraft as well. So these aircraft, they are restricted for departure in terms of takeoff weight, but they are not precluded from departing off of the runways at the airport. So one other thing that affects the performance of the aircraft is if there is a restriction imposed from a weight standpoint, that means that the aircraft either carries less of a payload in terms of passengers, baggage, or cargo, but it can also mean that it's a limitation on the amount of fuel that the aircraft can carry. And as a result, if you impose a weight restriction on the fuel, it affects the distance that the aircraft can fly nonstop. However, we did evaluate the aircraft performance capabilities with the longest runway at the airport, which is runway 1028 at 3,489 feet. And as you can see, these aircraft, even though they're payload restricted, they can still fly a pretty good distance to a destination for this airport. So just to conclude on that, with the fleet mix, the jet operations, they do represent a small percentage of the overall fleet mix, approximately 0.1%. Again, those I believe 166 operations since the beginning of 2022. There have been 8 known jet types that have operated at the airport over the last nearly 2 years. Most of those jets are classified as small jets, meaning they have a maximum takeoff weight of under 12,500 pounds. And as a result, given the existing runway lengths, the maximum allowable landing weight for some of the jets that operate at Lantana may be restricted in terms of weight during wet runway conditions. During dry runway conditions, it doesn't appear there's much of a weight restriction, if any, on those aircraft. However, when we look at the takeoff runway lengths, many more of the jets operating at Lantana can't operate at their maximum takeoff weight and their max range. However, they could still depart off these runways as long as they keep their takeoff weight below that is required for that to depart off those runways. The existing takeoff runway lengths are at Lantana are sufficient to operate at a range of at least 500 nautical miles, as presented in that previous chart. Some of them can still even operate well over 1,000 nautical miles. I think there was one close to 2,000 miles there as well. So the performance capabilities for the aircraft could be restricted, but they still can serve a pretty good amount of destinations out of this airport. So now I want to transition over to the airfield design standards assessment. Airfield design standards are prescribed by the Federal Aviation Administration. They're contained in a document referred to as Advisory Circular 150-5300-13B, and the title of that document is Airport Design. This is what really drives the design standards, not only for the lengths of the runway and the widths of the runway, but also for a variety of surfaces and safety zones associated with the runway that need to be protected for aircraft operations. The airfield today is configured with 3 runways in a triangular fashion. The primary runway here at the airport, as I mentioned, is runway 1028. That's the east-west runway. It has an overall length of 3489 and is 75 feet wide. Along the east side of the airfield is runway 1634 with a length of 33,421 feet, and that runway is 100 feet wide. And then runway 422, which is on the west side, has a length of 3,256 feet and 75 feet wide. 2 of the runways are configured with a parallel taxiway system. Taxiways A or Alpha and C for Charlie and taxiway Bravo run parallel to runways 1028 and 1634. Although runway 422 does not have a parallel taxiway, these other taxiways that exist to allow the aircraft to taxi to and from that runway to the ramp area that's located on the south side of the airport. Now, when we talk about design standards, the first thing we look at is a runway safety area. And this is the most critical element of the safety standards that the FAA establishes for a runway. It's an area that's centered around the runway to protect, to reduce the risk of damage to aircraft in the event that the aircraft either undershoots, overshoots, or deviates from the runway upon landing or departure. 90% of 90% of aircraft accidents typically occur within the runway safety area. The safety area should be clear of all objects unless they're fixed by function within the safety area, such as like runway edge lights and those types of things. In addition to just being clear of objects, there are specific grading, drainage, and load-bearing requirements, particularly if an aircraft does deviate from the runway so that it can support the weight of that aircraft, but also facilitate emergency response equipment to be able to respond to the aircraft as well. As I mentioned, this is the most critical element of the design standards for an airfield. As a matter of fact, the FAA does not allow any encroachment of the runway safety area, and they have spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars over the last 15, 20 years, ensuring that airports all across the country are in compliance with runway safety area standards. Now, to enhance the safety around the safety area, there's another criteria referred to as a runway object-free area. This area is essentially the same length as the safety area, but it's wider, and it's intended to keep objects free, fixed objects free of this area, to enhance the safety of structures and aircraft on the ground. So essentially, if an aircraft does deviate from the runway, it provides an additional margin of safety in case the appendages of the aircraft extend beyond the safety area, or there's more debris field outside of that area. So it is intended to protect aircraft should there be an excursion from the runway. One thing to note is that fixed objects are to be removed from the object-free area. That includes parked aircraft. However, aircraft that are moving on the airfield, taxiing aircraft, are permissible within the runway object-free area. They are precluded from going into the runway safety area, but they may be in the runway object-free area. Now, in addition to those two criteria, we also have off the ends of the runways what we refer to as a runway protection zone. The purpose of the runway protection zone, or RPZs that they're commonly referred to, is to prevent incompatible land uses within those areas. Now, over the years, the FAA hasn't necessarily enforced RPZs as stringently as they have with safety areas and object-free areas. And part of the challenge is that they often extend beyond the airport property boundary. In recognition of that, the FAA is looking for airports to evaluate their runway protection zones on a continuous basis and look for opportunities to mitigate should there be incompatible land uses within there. So the purpose is to prevent new incompatible land uses, and to the extent practical, the airport sponsor should be looking for opportunities to clear the runway protection zones of existing incompatible uses and ensure that the area remains clear of such objects and activities. It is desirable to try to clear the entire RPZ of above ground objects. Given that that's not necessarily always achievable, particularly due to the fact that a lot of sometimes they extend beyond the airport property boundary. But it is something that the airport will continuously evaluate. So the FAA does provide allowances for grandfathering of some existing incompatible land uses. It is determined on a case-by-case basis. The FAA also does not recommend shortening runways due to existing incompatible land uses within the runway protection zones. However, they do expect the airport sponsor, such as the Department of Airports, to seek all possible opportunities to eliminate, reduce, or mitigate those incompatible land uses. Now, we also look at the separation standards for the runways to the parallel taxiways. There are design standards associated with that. So we look at not only the separation between the center lines between the runway and the parallel taxiways, but also what we refer to as the hold position markings. Anywhere you have a taxiway that intersects a runway, there is a hold position marking which alerts the pilot that he must remain behind that line while aircraft are operating on the runway. Obviously, as aircraft get bigger or their approach speeds are faster, those separations tend to increase over time. Now, when we start to look at the design standards, there's two primary elements that dictate those separation standards and the physical conditions of the airfield. The first is the approach speed, as I mentioned, that dictates the runway, the requirements for runways and the runway dimensional clearances. And what we refer to is the FAA has 5 aircraft approach categories, classifications. They're lettered A through E, and they're based on the speed of the aircraft when the aircraft is on final approach. So an approach category A is representative of a small piston aircraft, where going up to an E is representative of something like a fighter jet type aircraft. Also, the design standards are dictated by wingspan. The classification of aircraft based on wingspan is referred to as the airplane design group. There are 6 design groups, starting with Group 1, which is a wingspan under 49 feet. That's reflective of some of your smaller piston aircraft, and going as large as Group 6, which is representative of large jumbo aircraft or new large aircraft such as an A380 or 747. So when we look at design standards, we have to establish what the critical aircraft is, meaning what is the most demanding aircraft type that operates on the airport, to really establish those design standards. The design standards that are applied at an airport like this are not identical to the design standards for a large air carrier airport such as Palm Beach. The criteria that the FAA uses is to define the critical aircraft is a aircraft type or grouping of aircraft types that exceed 500 operations per year, and that does exclude helicopter operations. So we have to evaluate the fleet mix to determine what are the applicable design standards to apply to the airport. Those design standards are typically referenced or established by what we refer to as a runway design code. Those are the design standards that are specific to each runway. And again, that criteria is established based on that aircraft approach category and the airplane design groups. And it also considers not only the existing fleet mix, but the future projected fleet at the airport. So looking back since the jet ban, when we look at the classification of airports, the FAA utilizes utilizes an alphanumeric designation based on the aircraft approach category and the airplane design group. So it's a combination of the two. So you'll see that aircraft are designated as at this airport as either A1, B1, B2, or A2. Based on the fleet mix of the existing airfield, based on the fleet mix of the operations that have occurred since the rescinding of the jet ban, you'll see that the predominant majority, 98% of the operations here, are classified as A1, meaning that 98% of the aircraft that operate this airport have an approach speed of less than 91 knots and a wingspan of less than 40 knots. As I mentioned before, the critical aircraft determination is based on the most demanding aircraft type that has over 500 annual operations, and that coincides with what we refer to as A2. There were 801 A2 operations since the rescinding of the jet ban. There's also over 500 operations by B1 aircraft. However, the design standards associated with A2 aircraft are more demanding. So therefore, based on the current fleet mix over the last almost year, that the A2 standards are applicable to this airport. The design standards can also be influenced by the weight of the aircraft. particularly when we look at the maximum certified takeoff weight of the aircraft, if the aircraft, the design aircraft or the critical aircraft is less than 12,500 pounds, then the design standards are less restrictive than if they're above 12,500 pounds. So this is another element that can influence the design standards at the airport, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But 12,500 pounds is the key number in terms of determining if additional criteria is required for the design standards. Now, as part of the ongoing master plan, we did develop a forecast of aviation activity for the airport through the year 2042. That coincides with the 20-year planning horizon. You can see that the composition is primarily consists of single engine piston, which is the dark blue. The light blue are helicopters. The green is multi-engine piston, and the orange is turboprop. And you can see as we forecast out, we do see that incremental growth of jet operations, which is the consists of the yellow shaded area in the bar. It's still projected to remain a relatively small percentage, but as demand materializes through the 20-year planning horizon, we do anticipate some limited growth in the jet operations as well. Now, we further took those forecasts and we segregated them by aircraft classifications using the runway design group or runway design code categories here. The chart on the left represents the overall fleet mix by the different runway design categories. The aircraft that are going to drive the critical aircraft, it's a little difficult to see in that bar chart on the left. So what we've done in the chart on the left is expanded the data associated with those aircraft types that are the most demanding in terms of design standards. And what this does is it does confirm that over the forecast period that we do anticipate that the critical aircraft will remain or will be the A2 to B2 small category, and therefore for our analysis we focus on the design standards associated with the A2 and the B2 category. The reason why we're calling it A2 B2 is that the A2 and B2 standards are the same, and they're actually classified or categorized consistently by the FAA. So that's what we'll be looking at in terms of doing our analysis of conformance to design standards for the existing airfield. So just to give you an idea of what the A2 and B2 small category looks like, representative aircraft within that category include a Cessna 208 Caravan or Beechcraft King Air. These are primarily turboprop aircraft. The A1 and B1 small categories are representative of more of your piston aircraft, single engine, such as a Cessna 172 and a Beechcraft Baird. For large aircraft, even though we don't anticipate it to be over 500 operations in the forecast, that's representative of a Beech King Air. There have been a few operations by even a C1, which is a little bit larger, which consists of a Learjet 31 that has operated. However, there's only been 6 operations since 2022 of an aircraft that classifies as a C1, and we do not project that those operations would materialize to a point where it would dictate the design standards have to meet the C1 criteria. So based on the fleet mix composition and what we're projecting, it will remain as a B2 airport. So now we talked about all of those, the 5 airfield design standards, such as the runway safety areas, the object-free areas, the runway protection zones, and the separation standards to the taxiways. With those, you can see how those standards are applied to the airport. They do require a runway width of at least 75 feet. The runway safety area has a width of 150 feet. The object-free area is 500 feet. The runway protection zone, the dimensions of the trapezoid, it has an inner width of 250 feet and 450 feet at the outer edges. And then the minimum separation between the runway center line and the parallel taxiway is center line is 240 feet and 125 feet to those hold position markings where the aircraft have to hold before they can enter into the runway. So currently the runways 1028 and 1634 are designated as A and B2 small runways, which coincides with the design standards that are shown on the right there for B2 aircraft. But runway 422 is actually configured for B1 aircraft, which is a smaller wingspan aircraft. So the design standards associated with runway 422 are less restrictive than those on runways 1028 and 1634. So when we look at those B2 design standards based on that criteria, we laid them out and determined that the runway width, the safety area, the object-free area, and the parallel center line to runway, runway center line to parallel taxiway center line, and runway center line to hold position markings fully comply with design standards for runway 1028. When we look at the runway protection zones, there are some encroachments, particularly with the roadways on both ends of the runway. That encroach that, and we just identified those as encroachments there. And so to the extent practical, we will be evaluating potential mitigation options as part of this study, and they will be incorporated into the master plan as well. With runway 1634, we also have some encroachments of the runway protection zones at both ends. At the north end of the runway, which is shown on the right side of the screen, there are a few buildings within the runway protection zone within the park over there. And off the south end of the runway, Lantana Road encroaches the runway protection zone, as well as a parking lot associated with a residential development there. The buildings of the residential area are not within the runway protection zone, but there is a portion of the parking lot that is. In addition to that, we did identify that there is one building, a hangar, that does encroach the object-free area. That's represented by the red box there off the left side of near the approach end to runway 34. That's something we'll be looking at mitigating as well. Now looking at runway 422, as I mentioned before, this runway currently has a B1 standard, which is a little bit more restrictive in terms of the width of the safety area and the object-free areas. We did not find any encroachments of the object-free areas, the safety areas. However, we did identify that there were a couple of encroachments within the runway protection zone for runway 4 on the south end. That includes Lantana Road. There's also a couple of buildings just on the south side of Lantana Road that do encroach within the runway protection zone, which includes the Dollar Tree store, a bank, and a very small corner of a building there, the Cherry Oak facility, just to the south of the Dollar Tree. So again, we will be evaluating as part of this study potential opportunities to mitigate those, but we have not done that analysis at this point yet. Now, one of the things that have been considered with the Part 150 study and will be evaluated as part of the master plan is looking at increasing the capability of runway 422 and bringing it up to the B2 standards. That doesn't affect the configuration of the runway protection zones off of the ends of the runway. What it does do is it increases the width of the safety area and the object-free areas. So if we do that, the only encroachment we identified is there is a portion of the aircraft parking apron. You can see just off to the edge of runway 4. There are some parking positions there that would fall within the confines of the runway object-free area. So therefore, we would have to, have to reconfigure that apron and preclude those parking positions from encroaching in there. So that's something that could be done here to improve the capability of runway 422, which we will be evaluating in more detail as part of the master plan to try to, since this runway is identified as the preferred noise abatement runway for the airport, that it does warrant further analysis to see if we can make this runway more attractive for all aircraft operations, not just the jet operations. So just to kind of put things into perspective about the encroachments of the runway protection zones, as I mentioned, it's very challenging for airports to ensure full compliance or compatibility with the runway protection zones. As a matter of fact, the Florida Department of Transportation, they completed a statewide aviation system plan, which was published in November of 2017, and they did an inventory of an audit of runway protection zones throughout the state. And it's statewide, 96% of the airports throughout the state have some sort of encroachments or incompatible land uses within their runway protection zones. They also broke that data down by districts. Palm Beach County falls within District 4, and you can see here that there are no airports within the entire district, which isn't just Palm Beach County, but other counties as well, where they have full compatibility within their runway protection zones of their primary runways. So this is something that we'll be evaluating and assessing. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to fully mitigate, but we're going to look at every option to try to enhance or fully mitigate those runway protection zones to the extent that it's financially and operationally feasible. And just to give you a kind of a flavor of some of those incompatible or encroachments at other airports throughout the state, looking at the two graphics on the left, this is runways at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. They have two parallel runways for runway 10 left, which is their main air carrier runway. You'll see that they have roadways as well as a railroad that encroaches their runway protection zones. Also on the south side, on their south runway, which was just constructed and opened in 2014, they have encroachments by not only a roadway but also some high power transmission lines that FP&L runs out of the Port Everglades and supplies most of Broward County out of that facility. Miami International also has encroachments of their runway protection zones. The image on the top for runway 28 left, they actually have a roadway as well as a highway that connects the State Road 112 into the airport. But they also have a flight school that's encroaching it, as well as a couple of gas stations within that runway protection zone on the north side. On the southeast corner of the airport, they have encroachments of the runway protection zones by highways, parking, and even airfield access gates as well. Boca Raton also has encroachments, particularly for runway 5. In addition to some roadways, there's actually a water treatment plant within their runway protection zone. And then on the north side of the airfield, they also have a couple roadways and a couple small buildings that encroach the sides of the runway protection zone there as well. So we just wanted to highlight the fact that it's not uncommon, and we do everything we can to mitigate it to the extent that we can do that, either through acquiring the property or establishing a navigation easement um, for the property, or establishing land use zoning controls for to be adopted for the surrounding areas. So this just provides a basic summary of the encroachments of the runway protection zones here at Lantana Airport. I won't spend a lot of time dwelling on these. I think I discussed them as we went through the graphics, but this does just provide us a good summary of those encroachments, as well as the encroachment of the object-free area that we'll be looking at mitigating for runway 1634. Okay. So we also evaluated the pavement conditions and the pavement strengths for the airport to determine if the introduction of jet aircraft would create issues with the airfield pavements, either from a safety standpoint, but also from a pavement maintenance standpoint. The first thing we looked at is a pavement condition report that the Florida Department of Transportation puts together. They actually assemble a statewide airfield pavement management program. The last time they updated this, they conducted inspections of all of the airfield pavements at the airport back in August of 2022. And then they rate those pavement conditions based on those observations. As you can see here, that the existing airfield pavements at the airport range from what we call a pavement condition index of 57, all the way up through up to a pavement condition of in the upper 80s to 90s, which is a good pavement rating here. So what this tells us is that the existing airfield pavements are in good shape. There are a few areas, such as the apron area on the west end of the aircraft parking apron, that is shown to be in fair, which means if we don't maintain it in the near term, that it will continue to degrade. We did mention in our first workshop that we do have the Department of Airports does have a project to rehabilitate the west end of the apron. Runway 422 is also showing as fair. It actually is in a little bit better shape than the apron. However, the Department of Airports will be looking at a project to rehab that runway in the near future as well. So from a pavement condition standpoint, overall the airport is in good shape. The two areas of concern are being addressed by the Department of Airports. Now, the conditions are different than the strength of the pavement. And the airfield pavement strength is really driven by the actual design. And when we evaluate airfield pavement strengths, we look at two different ratings. One is referred to as an aircraft classification rating, which is really aircraft specific, and it expresses the effect of an individual aircraft on the pavements with a specific number, and it's a ranking system. So the larger the aircraft, the more weight and more demands on the pavement structure, that it results in a higher classification rating, whereas a lighter, smaller aircraft would have a lower classification rating. And there's a lot of variables that influence these aircraft classification ratings, particularly the gear configuration and the weight of the aircraft and the likes. And then then we look at a pavement classification number, which looks at the actual design of the pavement. And the PCR represents the load carrying capacity of a particular section of pavement. And the PCR rating is not specific to an aircraft. What it really is intended is what type of load can it accommodate? based on its actual design. So what we do is we take the pavement classification number and we compare it with the aircraft classification number. And if the pavement classification number exceeds the aircraft classification number, then we know that the aircraft is operating within the design, the intended design of that pavement. If the aircraft classification number does exceed the pavement classification number, that means that that aircraft will cause that pavement to degrade at a more accelerated rate than if the pavement was just served by the original design or fleet of aircraft that it was designed for. So it's not just a matter of weight, as I mentioned, it's the configuration of the gear. And typically what you'll see with larger and heavier aircraft is they will have landing gear with 2 tires, some even have 4, and even, you know, air carrier aircraft you can see with eight tires on each landing gear. And the reason why they do that is to just more evenly distribute the load of the weight of the aircraft so that it causes less stress on the pavement below it. So, you know, usually with your small single engine piston aircraft, you'll see a single tire or single configuration, single wheel configuration. Whereas when you get into your larger, heavier aircraft, such as turboprop aircraft or even jet aircraft, you'll start to see dual wheel and even 4-wheel type configuration of aircraft. And that really influences the load on the pavement as well. And that needs to be factored in when you evaluate your pavement strengths. So we did look at all of the various pavements at the airport, including the 3 runways, all of the taxiways, and the general aviation apron, and established a PCR rating for that. You can see that the PCR ratings for those pavements range from 86 to 122. When you look at the chart on the right, we looked at the aircraft classification ratings. And again, it's based on the weight of the aircraft as well as the gear configuration. And those range from those ratings range from 16 up to almost 60 with the Cessna Citation 2, based on those aircraft types that we identified that have been operating at the airport. So since the PCR ratings for all of the pavements exceed the ACR ratings for the aircraft, that tells us that the pavements were designed with adequate strength to accommodate these aircraft that are operating, even if they are a little bit heavier than the fleet that existed before the jets were introduced at the airport. Now, the FAA in their design standards, which are prescribed in one of their advisory circulars, 5320-6F, which is their airport pavement design and evaluation, their design states that to accommodate aircraft less than 60,000 pounds, that it's recommended that you have 3 inches of asphalt on your pavement. Now, a majority of the pavement at the airport has 2 inches of asphalt, with the exception of runway 1634. However, the Florida Department of Transportation, they have a flexible pavement design manual that can be used to determine what they refer to as an equivalent pavement section. And it recommends pavement section requires equivalent pavement of 2 inches of asphalt with 4 1/4 inches of lime rock base beneath it. And that will be considered as an equivalent to having a 3-inch pavement. So even though most of the pavements at the airport have a 2-inch asphalt, the base underneath that pavement exceeds the 4 1/4 inches. We're looking at 6 or even 7 inches of lime rock base beneath all of the asphalt pavements on the airfield. So with that equivalent pavement section, we can further conclude that all the existing pavements meet or exceed the pavement requirement for aircraft, even as heavy as up to 60,000 pounds. So just to conclude, the current and the forecast fleet for the airport, we do not anticipate any adverse effects that would contribute to the premature deterioration of the pavements at the airport, whether it's the runways, taxiways, or apron. The overall recommended PCR for the airport is 86, and that can actually accommodate an aircraft of about 30,000 pounds if they have a single wheel landing gear. And if you have a dual wheel landing gear configuration, it could accommodate up to an aircraft up to 50,000 pounds. We're not even coming close to that based on the jet operations. They were well under 16,000 pounds for the aircraft that we identified that were operating to date at the airport. It is important to note that even if an aircraft does exceed the PCR, you can exceed it by approximately 10%. That's usually the rule of thumb. And that will, if you do have an aircraft that exceeds the rating for the pavement, it can accelerate the deterioration of the pavement, but it doesn't mean that the pavement will fail immediately if that aircraft operates on that pavement as well. Again, the DOA, they'll undertake pavement maintenance to maintain the pavement conditions regardless of what aircraft types fly at the airport. And the pavement strength is not needed to accommodate, pavement strengthening is not needed to accommodate existing or anticipated jet operations at the airport. So that concludes the discussion of the airfield analyses that we've completed to date. We will continue to work on doing our technical analyses, which we intend on completing by next March. And our intent is to have a final briefing with the community stakeholders sometime in April. The date is tentative, but that's what we're targeting for. And at that point, we will have another briefing and we'll present the final conclusions from our technical analyses for the study. So obviously you can submit comments tonight through the chat box or provide verbal comments as well. If you want to submit written comments, you can do that via email as well. We will be accepting those comments for a 2-week period through October 19th. We'll compile all of the comments that we receive, and we'll consider them in completing our technical analyses. Those technical analyses will be completed over the next several months, and we'll prepare our final study deliverables and conduct the final stakeholder briefing, as I mentioned, after the first of the year. So now we would like to open it up to public comments. Again, you can submit comments by clicking on the icon on your computer or mobile device. The comment icon has the question mark. You can type in your comments. We will respond to those comments. You can also submit via email, as I mentioned before. Here's the email address if you feel more comfortable just submitting via email, or if you think about something after tonight's meeting. Again, we won't be accepting those comments until after October 19th. Or we will be accepting those comments up until October 19th. If you want to submit oral comments, just click on the React icon on your screen, and that'll allow you to raise your hand and virtually, and we will select speakers in the order in which they have raised their hand with the React icon. And we do ask that you try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. And please be aware that we are recording this discussion. So any comments that are received will be recorded just so that we have a documentation for it for our records as well. So with that, I'd like to hand it over for comments.
Hey, Dave, are you able to hear me? Dave?
It appears he can't hear us, but we are separately asking him to take a look at the comments in the questions box.
Okay.
Dave, can you hear us now? Okay, we're still waiting for Dave with his technical difficulties here. So we apologize for this delay. So there are a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and just read out just so we can keep moving. Let's see. We had a question from Lawrence Silver. He asked, why can't we see the list of all the attendees in this meeting so that we can see if our representatives are present? I asked the same question. This platform doesn't allow that while it's live. We can publish a list of the names of the attendees on our website as a follow-up to this meeting. So we'll go ahead and do that, or we can send it to anybody who'd like to reach out to us and request a copy of who attended. Somebody indicated that they're not seeing the slides on their phone. We will be posting this on the website that was shown earlier, and that's also in the chat. Let's see. There's a question of whether the recording will be posted on the website. Yes, we certainly could post the recording on the website as well. Okay, I'm going to mute for 1 second and check on Dave. Dave, can you hear us yet?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay, thankfully. Okay. So I answered a couple of the questions already related to just kind of logistics. There was a question about the attendee list. I said that we could make the names of the attendees available to anybody who'd like that. There was a question about posting the recording on our website. I said yes, we would be doing that as well as the slides. So I'm going to turn it over to you on the additional technical questions. If you'd like, I'll go ahead and read some of them out. Would that be helpful?
Yes, that would be helpful. I thought Justina was going to read them out, but if you want to do it, that's fine.
Justina, do you want to take over?
I can.
Okay, thank you.
So the first question we have, Dave, is from Mary Adam, and her question reads, how will the public be protected regarding weight restriction of an aircraft if the aircraft does not indicate a restriction? Second part to that question is also, is there an entity/device to record and monitor the weight?
So, yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing the airport can do to preclude aircraft from operating at a specific weight. And that was pretty. I think that was pretty clear in the determination from the FAA when the jet ban was rescinded. So there's really no way for the airport to preclude or prevent any or impose any type of weight restriction at the airport. So, what was the second half of that question? I apologize.
So the second half of that question reads, also, is there an entity/device to record and monitor the weight? So I think you did answer it though.
Yes, I mean, yeah. In terms of record, I mean, you can record the airport noise monitoring system records the operations. So, and that gets tied back to the aircraft that's actually operating, assuming that it can link up with the flight plan for that aircraft. Um, but you don't actually know what the weight of the aircraft is. There's no way to measure that. There's a maximum takeoff weight that might be published or a maximum landing weight that's published for that type of aircraft, but the actual weight of the aircraft when it takes off or lands, there's no way to record that.
Okay, you have another question in the chat from Alan Kolbeck. The question reads, does the Department of Airports currently publish the weight restrictions for takeoff by aircraft type? If not, why not?
No, the airport. The only thing that's published is the weight bearing capacity of the runways, um, which is published in the airport's facilities directory or chart supplements for the airport. Um, there, the FAA has been hesitant for the airport to publish any other information pertaining to design standards for the airport, particularly in terms of wingspan or approach speed. But we're anticipating that they will not allow anything to be published for it in terms of weight either as well.
So I'm just going to jump in there. We do publish the PCN number, Dave, and
Okay.
yeah, and that single wheel and 30,000 pounds. And that is on our chart supplement information.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Laura. Okay, next question, Justine.
Next question is from Mr. William Coakley. The question reads, helicopter trainers typically use taxiways as their private runways, establishing a parallel runway system. Is this considered a safe practice?
Yes, it's very common for helicopter operators to do that on airfields. So I don't know what the current operating procedures are at the airport, Laura and Gary. I don't know if you have anything to interject on that.
So
No,
I
I don't.
agree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
go
don't
ahead.
believe we have anything in writing that stipulates that. But the one thing that I will say is, I know when we come up on one of the next portions of this study with the, I believe it's the intersecting runways, that can be looked at as well, and more in-depth look at that, those operations can happen during that portion of the assessment.
And it's also, our understanding, it's not an uncommon practice at airports that don't have designated landing areas.
Okay, next
Thank
question.
you. Our next question is from Mary Adam. Taxiways are used by helicopters. Seeing that standards require RSA and ROFA on regular runways, do taxiways have this as well? If not, how is that considered a safe operation while mixing other aircraft such as jets?
So there are object-free areas established with taxiways. We I can't say how they compare with the helicopter operations. That's beyond the scope of this study. But again, it is a common practice that the helicopter operations are occur in that fashion.
And we also have a comment from Mary Adam, and the comment was Beechcraft King aircraft have operated many more times than 6 here. I'm assuming that she's referring to the LNA airport.
Mm-hmm. So you are correct, and there's different variations of the King Air. We didn't look into the fleet mix of the King Air that specifically because we're focused on jet operations. There are some King Airs that are less than or that are 12.5 or less, and we know that the King Air 350 can be more than that. I don't know what the split is in terms of operations for those types of King Airs.
Thank you, Dave. Your next question is from Alan Callback. It reads, even though there are less than 500 annual operations, what are the safety risks associated with jet operations because the design standards are B2?
Well, I can't speak to the risks per se. All I know is that the FAA allows an aircraft to operate or doesn't preclude an aircraft to operate on an airfield if its physical characteristics exceed those of the design standards. Again, that goes back to the pilot in command and making that determination before before he even plans his flight.
Okay, and Mary Adam is asking for clarification. Says, can you clarify on runway 422, was that with an extension of the runway on slide 41?
Slide 41.
Yes.
We did not. Bear with me. I'll go back. $41. Okay. No, we did not. We did not look at extending the runway as part of this. We just looked at if we upgraded it to the B2 small standards from the existing B1, what the encroachment or what the impacts would be. So no, we have not looked at evaluating the potential extension of that runway. That is something that we may look at as part of the master plan, but right now we were just basing our analysis based on the current airfield configuration.
Okay, Dave, I'm going to pause from the chat for one moment. You did have a hand raised from Mr. Callback. Mr. Callback, if you still would like to speak, we can unmute you for you to speak your question this evening. Okay, and if you're unable to mute, if you just want to type into the question
No,
chat box. Oh,
no, I was able to do it.
okay.
Dave, thank you for the very thorough presentation. I do want to understand, going back, can you go back to the slide at the beginning that talks about the pilot making the determination about whether he or she can land at the airport?
There you go.
Yeah. So it says, and this is why I was asking these questions, and it's somewhat incongruous to me. And I understand it, once again, it's the FAA's rules. But if the pilot needs to have the information to decide whether he can take off or land, why does the FAA preclude the airport from publishing the information that may inform them as to whether they can safely land at or take off at LNA once they've landed?
Yeah. I
So
mean,
we actually do publish the airport elevation, and most of the information included in here is available in the chart supplement. What you're talking about is specifically the design standard, which is different.
Yes,
We do, yeah,
that's what I am.
yeah, we do publish the PCR, the airport elevation, and all the information typically published by every other airport for a pilot to determine whether or not, they're capable of landing at the airport.
No, but I'm asking the question, if you look at this, what this is inconsistent with the FAA restricting you from publishing the design standard information. I just don't understand it. But I mean, once again, that's something to be noted for the record, that the FAA has this prescription on what the pilot should be doing, but you can't provide the information so that the pilot is properly informed, because the FAA says that. That's all.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. The second thing I wanted to just follow up on is, you know, I think there are safety risks if you have jets that, and once again, it's under 500 annual hours of operations, but they are coming into an airport with the constraints that we know that LNA has. And I'm just trying to understand, how we get our arms around those risks. Because once again, this is something that's incongruous to me, that and we're in a unique situation here because you have residential areas immediately abutting the airport. So there's not a lot of margin of error. So I just want to be clear that once again, this is an FAA prescription, that it's okay because the pilot can make that determination. Yet once again, they preclude you from giving him the information as we just discussed, and the fact that you may have larger aircraft coming in here that the airport can't safely accommodate. And the FAA doesn't care because it's under 500 annual hours of operations. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
So I think the FAA's requirement indicates that the design standard does not mean more demanding aircraft can't use the airport safely, as long as the pilot in command has gone through this process to determine that they can safely land there. Am I saying that correctly, Dave?
yes.
Yeah, but they're restricting you from publishing all the information of some of the things that Dave went through, especially in terms of takeoffs and landing. I don't want to belabor it, but I got the drift. Also, I think Cynthia Schultz had two questions that were in the queue. I don't know whether they were read or not. I didn't hear them.
We can go back to those if you want to go ahead and read those. They were from Cynthia Schultz.
Yeah, I think we were going
We
through that they were projected, so I think that's why Justina skipped
correct.
around.
We do have a few questions from her, but there were some comments prior to that.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So the next question that we have in the chat is from Mr. William Coakley, and it reads, where is the airspace study with density, contours, plots, and I'm assuming he means etc. with the additional dots.
The airspace study with the concentration.
It says, where's the airspace study with density contours? And then it says plots and etc.
Okay. So I'm not sure if he's referring to the noise study that we talked about before. There with the noise contours. That information is available online. I think we had a slide here with a link to the Part 150 study. There was a web address, which I can flip back to that slide.
Yeah, and Dave, I'll jump in too. I think what Mr. Coakley is referring to is just airspace assessment in general. And I know we're not at that point yet. You haven't started that assessment yet, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Yes, that's correct. So I'm sorry, I was having a hard time understanding the question, but yeah, the airspace assessment will be presented at the next workshop or briefing, which we'll be doing in the spring.
Your next question is from Cynthia Schultz, and she's referring to slide 21, and the question reads, does this consider wet, dry, and temperature?
It accounts for 86 degrees. It does account, I don't think it's for a dry runway. It's for a dry runway in 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And the short range runway length assumes 4 passengers on the aircraft.
Thank you. There was a comment from Mary Adam inquiring about whether or not the presentation recording would be found on the website. And that was answered earlier, but yes, everything will be posted. So the next question after that is from Cynthia Schultz. She is referring to slide 38, 39, and 40. And her question reads, will the updated ALP reflect a modification to standards for the incompatible land uses in the RPZs?
Well, the FAA does not grant modification to standards for encroachments of RPZs. We will be evaluating alternatives to mitigate and present those as part of the master plan and determine if anything needs to be done. But we don't intend on having a modification of design standards for those. That's not common.
Thank you. Mary Adam is clarifying her previous question, and her clarification reads, I'd like to clarify, essentially, will this safety study end up providing recommendations regarding limitations on weight so as to ensure the information is clear to pilots and protect the public?
No. The only thing we could do is, as we mentioned, is request that the FAA publish something as a chart supplement. But so far they have not been open to doing so.
I'd like to clarify too that there's been a change in guidance of going from the PCN number to PCR. That you've gone through that exercise, so we would be updating that. So any additional information that we get that indicates that there's a change, we would obviously, if it's appropriate in the chart supplement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I see that Mary Adam has her hand raised. So at this time, we'd like to go ahead and acknowledge you if you would still like to speak.
Thank you. Good evening. Yes, and it was in regards to my clarification from earlier, but I guess at this point, since you provided that answer, I guess I'm just hoping that this safety assessment is going to encompass these requests and not just go by what the FAA allows or doesn't allow for the safety assessment to really truly be independent and objective, since that is definitely a great concern for us in the community in regards to the limitations or restrictions that would be presented during the course of this assessment. If that, hopefully I'm clear.
Sure, you were clear. And actually, as a result of what we've discovered with these small encroachment at the corner of the hangar within the object-free area, we have already requested a update to the chart supplement for that because that's appropriate to include. So yes, if we see things that are appropriate to address, we will. But we do have to comply with FAA requirements and standards, whether we like them or we don't like them.
No, I understand that, but I thought that this safety assessment would highlight some of these aspects that are evidently kind of coming up even at this point in time, in this point regarding even the weight restrictions and that information being available to pilots and public.
So I do want to be clear. I mean, we do have information that's typically published about weight bearing capacity on the chart supplement, the way the FAA prescribes us to put the information out there. What Mr. Callback is asking for is us to publish the design standard. So those are two different things.
Mm.
So the information that typically pilots would use to determine whether or not they can land and take off from a runway is published.
And so right now it says 12,500, if I'm not mistaken.
It does not. Gary,
Okay.
I don't know if you want to weigh in, or Michael.
Yes, the chart supplement currently lists 30,000 pounds for the weight bearing capacity for the runways. And the 12,500 is a design standard used to determine the different surfaces for the RSA and ROFA, and it is only intended to determine the federal funding eligibility to construct those design standards and surfaces. It is not intended to restrict operations by aircraft of a certain size or weight.
All right, thank you.
So just to be clear with everyone, the information that Dave went through in the very beginning of this presentation really reflected the information that pilots need to go through in order to decide whether a particular aircraft can land, and there are a lot of factors that go into that. So that was what he was indicating, is if you take all these factors into consideration, there are jets under particular conditions that are capable of landing. But there will be conditions, and there will be conditions where they would not be capable of landing as well. So they have to go through that process as required by federal regulations.
Right. And I guess, is there any means then that the FAA has agreed to establish that pilots are in compliance or doing their part to ensure that that is done and the airport is used safely?
That is their role through the Flight District Standards Office. And we have had inspections, actually frequent inspections of the Lantana Airport, including, I am aware of at least one cargo operator regarding payload to make sure that they weren't overweighted when taking off. So that is something that they do.
Okay, a random inspection then is how this would be checked on for the weight.
They don't weigh aircraft as they're landing. There is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael or Gary or Dave, I'm not aware of any situation where any aircraft at any airport is weighed when it's landed. That calculation happens, at the pilot level.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not aware.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question that we have in the chat is from Roger Manning. It reads, other than the encroachment issue, are there any other standards that don't meet requirements?
Well, no. We have the encroachment of the OFA for runway 1634, and then we have the encroachments of the RPZs. So those are the only encroachments that we've identified to this point. When we do the obstruction analysis, we will look at the airspace surfaces and determine if there's anything that needs to be mitigated from that standpoint. So we can't speak right yet to obstructions, but as far as the design standards associated with the runways, no, those are the only ones we identified.
Thank you. We have a question from Cynthia Schultz. It reads, can the airport sponsor consider shortening a runway to mitigate incompatible land use in the RPZ, even though the FAA does not recommend it?
It could be evaluated, but doesn't mean it could be considered as part of the alternatives analysis. Yes, it could be evaluated, but whether it's the right whether it's warranted is a different discussion. So, but look, there it does consider potential for shifting or adjusting from that standpoint. That could be evaluated, but doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it.
We do have two hand raised. I just want to read one comment that was in the chat. It just reads, airspace density plots are essential. So for the hand raise, we have Mr. Allen Callback first. Can go ahead and speak, Mr. Callback.
Yes, thank you. Can we, I just want to be clear, Dave, can you go back to that slide again that you were discussing that it was dry conditions at 86 degrees Fahrenheit? I think the one you were answering Cynthia's question. Just want to make sure I understand it.
Hold on a second.
Was that 29 or what?
21, I believe, Dave.
Yep.
So what this is saying is that a predominant number of jets, once again, given weight, what based on the jets that are using the airport, would be exceeding the distance under dry conditions that are available on runway 422 and runway 1028, assuming that they didn't adjust the weight, correct?
Well, that's assuming that they're taking off at maximum takeoff weight.
Yes, that's what I meant. That's what I said. Yes, got it.
That is correct.
So under wet conditions, it'd be even more stringent, correct?
I don't know the answer to that question, Alan. I'll have to get back to you. I don't know. I know for landing distance, you apply a factor for consideration for wet runway. I'm not sure about the balance field length. I have to go back and check on that.
Okay.
So,
But what?
but
Yeah,
the
no, I
message,
understand.
and I think the message here is that whether it's a wet runway or a dry runway, there is a payload restriction that's imposed on these specific aircraft. But as long as they do their departure calculations, there's nothing, and their runway, what their performance manual says they need for takeoff distance, if it's less than the available runway length, they're permitted to depart. So, I mean, that's the whole point. But there is some weight restrictions on these aircraft. Yes, they can't just go out there with a full payload and full of fuel, but they can still depart if they have less fuel and this is just a representative example. I mean, if you've got a temperature that's down at like 40 or 50 degrees, the runway length requirement actually reduces even further than this. So it every day it can change just based on the weather and where the aircraft's flying and how many passengers he's carrying and all those types of things.
Yeah, I know, but I think, the concern, and this, is that, there weren't jets here, there are now jets, and all it takes is one incident. And the FAA is restricting the ability of the county to publish information that may prevent an accident. And that's all I'm trying to get at. But I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying on this one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, we do have another hand raised, but the last question that is in the chat actually refers to the slide that you already have up. I think you may have already gone over it, but I do want to read it. It reads,
Sure.
can you provide slide 21 with a wet runway?
I don't think I have access to that, and I need to go back. Like I said, I need to go back and see if there is even a factor for a wet runway. Because I know for taking off, when you're landing, wet runway affects your ability to decelerate. When you're taking off, and I realize we talked about accelerate stop distance. I need to verify if that is indeed, it needs to be factored in for these calculations.
We'll take that one as homework as an outstanding question.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a hand raised. So now we would like to acknowledge Ken Lass.
Yes, my meeting I have. Well, I'm representing citizens living near the airport. We have a lot of senior citizens who live in the numerous senior living communities around here, which they were paying $1,000 a month for quiet, peaceful life. And more jets, heavy jets, will increase the annoyance.
Sir, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you either speak up or get closer to your microphone?
Okay, is this better? Okay.
Oh, go ahead and give it a try.
We have a lot of senior citizens around here. We have one at the intersection of Congress and Donnelly Drive. We have V Lakeside Village on Donnelly Drive, that's where I live. We have two on the old Congress Road, and we have another one, a couple more on High Road. So we have a lot of them around here, and we're very concerned about noise. I don't remember seeing a sign, the slide showing the recommended air corridors for them to take off on this east-west runway. If they're going north, which way do they go? Going south, how do they go? How do they fly? So they minimize the noise to the people below. I know big airports have recommended corridors for the aircraft to take until they get a certain height. So I don't understand that. I'm a past president of the Residence Council here for my community in Lakeside Village. I'm also still on the officers list, and I'm also the past president of COBRA, the Coalition of Residential Associations, and we have members going up to Lantana Road and Congress. So we have 114 communities representing over 140,000 people. So that's a huge area, but we're very concerned because the aircraft approaching and leaving Lantana will fly over where those people live. So I'm trying to speak for the people who live here and try to make sure their life is as peaceful as possible.
So sir, we appreciate your comment. It was a little difficult understanding everything that you were saying. Do you think you could submit an email after the meeting to document your comment or your question, and then we can correspond that way?
Sure.
Okay. You have the email address. It was on one of the previous slides, correct?
I have his email as well, Dave. I can reach out to him.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
And
Perfect.
maybe we can set up a phone call or whatever's going to be most convenient for you guys.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Okay.
Mr. Les, I have your information. I'll follow up in an email so that you can let us know the best way to contact you so they can get your question.
Thank you.
Okay, Justina, anyone else?
You just have a comment that is in the chat, which is the final comment that we have. We don't have any other hand raises. It's just a comment for the record from Mary Adam about the community's position in terms of development and accommodation. So we can probably keep this for the record so that you guys have it, but she did provide a comment that she would like to be a part of the record.
Justina, can you read it just for the
Do you want me to read it? Okay,
yeah,
I
just
will
for
do
the
that.
folks that may still be on the phone.
Okay. So it reads, I'd like to state for the record, this community does not want development or accommodations. We would like preservation of the airport as it is. Therefore, if this study is going to list accommodations or changes that would assist jet aircraft to operate safely, I'm quite confused because I thought this was to highlight where the airport presents limitations, thus where restriction recommendations would be reasonable and necessary. Thank you for reading this for the record.
Thanks, Justina.
You're welcome. So just checking over the chat again, that was the final comment that we had there. And again, we do not have any additional hand raises at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Justina. And thank you everyone for participating in your input. Again, if you think of any other questions or comments you'd like to submit, please use the email address and we'll have a couple of weeks. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.